Not since the abdication crisis in 1936 has there been so much turmoil surrounding the royal family. But in the middle of it all, weathering the storm, one figure has remained constant, Queen Elizabeth II, who is celebrating her 70th birthday. The Queen is perhaps the most famous woman in the world. She's reigned in Britain for over 40 years through a period of dramatic change, and yet so little is known about her. In this tribute, we look at some of her achievements and enjoy a privileged insight into some of her qualities through the eyes of those who know her.
Through this slightly forbidding outside, there is a gleam of humor and wit that is irrepressible.
She is a warm and compassionate human being. She's been a great monarch, a great leader, and I respect her in so many ways.
She is the most conscientious lady. Whatever duty requires, she will do.
You were allowed to mingle, and you were allowed to dance with Her Majesty or Princess Margaret if you wanted to. I was too scared. I danced with the Brigadier instead. But it's
I don't think anyone could have done the job with more commitment than Her Majesty has done.
In February 1952, the Queen's father, King George VI, died. For the young princess, it meant a dramatic change.
Suddenly it struck one that this young woman of 25, that from now on it was going to be a public life for the rest of her life.
It was, it was the talking point of everybody, you know, everywhere in the country at that particular time. There was a great affection for her mother, for her father, and as it turned out, I'm very pleased to say for her.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary of York, born in London in 1926, had never expected to accede to the throne. Her father became king when her uncle David dramatically abdicated in 1936. Then she knew that one day she would find herself in the gold carriage on her way to Westminster.
I remember on the coronation day it was, and she was leaning out of this lovely coach, and she looked so beautiful, and this lovely smile of hers, and this photograph had been captured of her, and I've always treasured it. Very happy day, very happy lady, young girl.
One after another, the visiting monarchs, and one after another, the armed forces went on the square. It was a great spectacle.
I bought a television set, and I remember sitting there in front of it, lost watching the coronation. It was like if you were part of history, a tremendous sense of occasion.
I can conjure up very clearly watching the coronation on the black and white television at home, and how the entire day was geared around that, and how you watched the reruns in the evening, and this wonderfully solemn moment when the Queen was crowned, and how very young she was amidst all this ageless ceremony.
It felt heavy, the crown, you know, and I heard that they had to adjust it for Her Majesty. And I remember her beautiful gown she wore on that tiny, tiny waist.
It was a magnificent occasion, and I remember that from breakfast to lunch was really quite a long time. One couldn't help noticing that some peers down below had made provision for this.
Somehow it was a sort of Cinderella story, that we'd all been in rags, and suddenly here the whole nation was in riches, and the crowds with the flags out and the cheering, and everybody was, so excited and thrilled, and it was just euphoric, the whole thing.
The newspapers, who, as you know, saved the headlines for that day, the headlines about Everest being conquered. All this and Everest too, it said.
Yeah, that was the wonderful thing, climbing Everest. That seemed to put the icing on the cake.
Well, I think the first time I met the Queen was after Mount Everest, when all the members of the expedition went to Buckingham Palace. The only people there were the royal family and the Queen, of course, and the putting of the sword on the shoulders. It was all rather fun.
The rationing was still on, certain things were still rationed, and it was a bit bleak. And suddenly the coronation itself, even though everybody's sad about the King's death, it was a new era. I mean, the new Elizabethan era, that was the sort of thing that all the papers said, and it was actually, as if there was a spirit of hope around, and people were looking forward to better things.
Since 1952, before that, in the case of the Queen's father, but certainly in the lifetime of the Queen, we have been wonderfully served. And whether she's been leading the nation in rejoicing as England win the World Cup in 1966, or as last year, the VE Day and the VJ celebrations, or much more recently, representing me, which I felt she was doing at Dunblane, and doing so exactly in the way that I would have wished it to be. She has just done it superbly well.
Having been a monarch for so long, she is absolute master of ceremonial. And chooping the colour, she knows everything that should happen. On every state occasion, she knows every single formal ceremonial that there is. The way the Queen gets about among people. She's never at a loss for a word. She knows how to put people at their ease. She can see people who are nervous through great occasions when she is giving the honours and receiving people.
You get an envelope as the date approaches, which you have to fill up by deleting that which is wrong or unnecessary. And the questions are: 1, I can kneel; 2, I cannot kneel, ... I was reduced eventually to calling them on the telephone, because I said my case is neither one nor the other, because I can kneel, but I can't get up again afterwards.
The Queen rather enjoys slips in protocol. She has, as her ancestors had, a very keen eye for detail.
I remember when I was being awarded the Order of the Garter, they pin something over your shoulders, and you have to have 2 supporters who are already members of the Garter. So I put an inquiry through as to whether the Duke of Edinburgh, whether he'd do the job. And his secretary told me afterwards that when he presented this suggestion to the Duke of Edinburgh said, "Oh, nobody's ever asked me before. I'd be happy to do it." But the Duke of Edinburgh wasn't very good at pinning this thing onto the shoulder. And the Queen came forward and said, no, not like that. And like a good mother, she pinned it up in the correct place and then stepped back. I thought she was very, very competent.
You have to arrive at a certain time and put your car in a certain place, and everything is tremendously well organized, as though it was Silverstone or some other pastoral diversion. And I'd been to the palace before, and a very, very old gentleman came up to me on that occasion in a frock coat and said, "Good evening, Sir Peter. I am your page for tonight." which always rather struck me as odd, because I imagine a page to be very young with pointed shoes and bells on it and a cap and God knows what. Well, no, the pages in Buckingham Palace are men in retirement. And on this occasion, we all come in, and we all came into a long hall, many people following each other, and one of the pages would say, OBE, and you'd say, no, knighthood, knighthood, in there, please. And then the next person come and said, OBE, no, MBE, NBE, down those stairs and on the left.
I first met the Queen the second time that I was in London. I came back as minister at the embassy. And you had to, every year, go off to a diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace. And it's a rather splendid event, and it does make you feel a little 19th century, although an American is always embarrassed because you don't have the appropriate diplomatic uniform. I was always afraid somebody was going to come up to me and ask me to go get them a drink.
In the formal ceremonies of state, the Queen brings a sense of duty to her role as monarch.
She has a unique position. No one else has it. No one else has been there, I think, quite as long. No one has a position as reigning monarch for quite so long, plus head of a Commonwealth.
My lords, pray be seated.
She is, in her acceptance of her role, absolutely unique. I've never found anybody who turned a virtual enslavement to a concept into a certain majesty and gave the impression also of having behind that facade a freedom of thought which is entirely personal and which was very, very rarely come across. She would occasionally say something which always surprised by the fact that it was so full of personality, because on the face of it she seemed to swallow all that in the interests of the image she created. And she obviously had inculcated into her by someone a very powerful image of what her role should be.
My lords and members of the House of Commons.
One of the joys of working for the Queen, as I did for 5 years, was that you were working for somebody who absolutely knew what her job was. She knew her role, she knew the responsibilities, and she believed in the system, and it was always quite clear in her own mind what was going to be required of her on any one particular occasion.
Mr. President.
There would have been absolutely no point in suggesting the Queen that she should be other than herself. To say in so many words, please act up on this occasion, well, absolutely no, total non-starter.
She's a hard worker, and she's not only the monarch, but she is head of the Commonwealth. And I find it difficult to believe that anyone could have discharged that role with a greater degree of commitment and knowledge, understanding and tact than she has.
That is very English. You will forgive me if I have a slightly outside look at it. The 50th anniversary of the United Nations at Westminster Hall, where the Queen spoke very movingly about peace.
I say that we should pledge ourselves again to the creation of a world which lives up to those principles of peace and understanding.
John Major, on his way to a summit in Cannes, talked very movingly and with unexpected originality on the subject of peace. Pérez de Cuéllar read a poem by Kierkegaard on the subject of peace, and there was a new cantata sung. The theme of it was peace. But of course, being in Westminster Hall and being in England, the background to all this was entirely military. So the Queen ended her speech by saying, "And I hope that the call to arms will never again be heard in this land." And I really found it irresistibly comic.
Don't forget, she has boxes every day. The boxes contain all the documents of state which she has to sign, contain information about what is going on. So every day of her life, and she never retires, every day of her life, she has duties which she carries out, and she probably is the best informed person in the whole of the United Kingdom.
At home or abroad, her devotion to duty is without concern for danger.
I think the Queen is enormously brave in her job because, I mean, she reckons that you might be in a dangerous situation. I remember, I mean, in this first Commonwealth tour of 52, 53, when we were in Aden, again, they had to do a long drive, I think in open cars, and we'd been told that they thought there was somebody who was going to go throw a bomb, but you'd never know it from watching her.
The palace, the protocol, the history, the traditions, the do's, the don'ts, the be careful of this and don't say that, and certainly don't spill your tea or trip over the carpet or any of those things. And yet around this extremely elaborate structure is really a very simple, straightforward woman. And in some respects, I think it's the counterpoint that projects, if you will, the majesty of the office. And she seems to do it very naturally in circumstances which are so obviously unnatural. There's a lot of contradiction in that. And yet she has resolved those contradictions in a very appealing and attractive way.
The 250th anniversary of Number 10, I think, and the Queen and Prince Philip came. The other prime ministers were invited. This was a very pleasant, informal evening. There was no great protocol about it. And they wanted a photograph of us, so we just stood around. And it's perfectly true that Alec was rather covered. And so we moved along. But that was very characteristic of her. She always noticed those sort of things, took action to put them right.
Heath tells a lovely story against himself, revealing the Queen's sharp sense of humour. American President George Bush was in London just before the Gulf War, and Edward Heath had berated him for mishandling relations with the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein.
I told him that he ought to go and meet Saddam Hussein personally and talk face to face to him. And he said, well, we've asked him, we've said if he wants to come to America, he can. And I said, that's not the way a great power should behave. And it's not the way you should behave. You should go yourself to Baghdad. After all, I've been there myself. You should go there yourself. And the Queen turned to me and she said, yes, but you're dispensable, aren't you?
When the Queen came to Washington for a state visit in May of 1991, the ceremony, the greeting ceremony, took place on the lawn behind the White House. And the President and the Queen went up on a platform, and there was a podium in front of it. And President Bush, who is maybe 6'2", came up to the podium and said his words of welcome, and then he stepped aside, and the Queen stepped to the podium. And of course, the podium was much too high for her, and all the photographs in the newspapers the next morning showed the top of the podium and this hat and these little queenly eyes in between. I think people were struck by the joke of it. But the next day, the Queen went to address a joint session of Congress. This is a big deal. The two houses of Congress meet in the chamber of the House of Representatives. It's a big event. And again, there she was, standing in the well of the House of Representatives. And her first line to these politicians was delivered absolutely straight.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
And then all these politicians who understand this stuff extremely well just broke into uproarious laughter, and she had that house in the palm of her hands.
The Queen most certainly does have a very highly developed sense of humour, and it's a very sophisticated one. It doesn't emerge in public very often, and she's never going to say, "Have you heard the one about?" And nor is she ever really going to deliver a side-splitting speech. She's capable of getting a good line across. I remember at the silver wedding anniversary, when she began her speech in Guildhall, she was able to laugh at herself.
I think everybody really will concede that on this, of all days, I should begin my speech with the words, "My husband and I." We, and by that I mean both of us, are most grateful.
I think people perceive the Queen as a serious person, but no, I believe that the Queen has a very human side, and a more, I would like to call it impish, a very dry sense of humour.
It's almost exactly the same colour as my dress, which is interesting. Good choice.
A lovely sense of humour. I don't think you could do that task of being the Queen for such a long time without a sense of humour.
My last meeting with her was very typical. I was asked to do a performance together with 3 historians who helped me write this thing about the relations between royalty and prime ministers. It was Jim Callahan's idea, and we did it to the smallest audience that I've ever faced. There were the royals, 4 of them, and all the remaining prime ministers. The Queen wandered in all by herself, being the first to come out after dinner, and she came up to me and she said in that very specific and rather unresonant juvenile voice, which she still preserves, "Are we going to laugh?" I said, "Madam, really that's not my responsibility. That really has to be up to you. But one thing I would ask you, if by chance you don't laugh, out of charity, will you consider this an extremely serious performance?"
I do remember once at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Canada, it was in Vancouver, and the practice that the Queen had at each of these biennial meetings was to set aside a portion of time to meet each one of the 50 heads of the Commonwealth Government. At any rate, on this occasion I was summoned, and obviously when there are so many you have to leave the actual conference. And she said to me as I came in, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hawke." I said, "Good afternoon, Your Majesty." She said, "I hope you weren't caused any inconvenience by having to leave the conference at this stage." And I said, "I'll leave that to Your Majesty to judge. I had to walk out while Mrs. Thatcher was speaking." And she laughed. And she said, "Well, I thought that Mrs. Thatcher had already spoken this morning." I said, "Ma'am, you should well know, perhaps better than any others, that Mrs. Thatcher is capable of speaking more than once in one day."
I think there are now 51 or 52 members of the Commonwealth. When she became Queen, there can only have been 7 or 8, or not more than 9 dominions. All the rest have come from being colonies to full nationhood during her reign. And she remembers each one. She remembers the circumstances of each one. And I don't think they'd come to a Commonwealth conference, all of them, great and small, unless she were there and she receives each and every one.
The Queen has presided over the transition from empire to Commonwealth, which has often been difficult.
There were very difficult times for the Commonwealth for 2 reasons. One, the Rhodesian problem, and then when that was solved, the South African problem. And so far as Britain was concerned, we certainly sometimes felt during that time that the Commonwealth was lined up against us in an unfair way. But there have been moments of difficulty in Australia, with Fiji. There have been moments of difficulty.
Are you worried about Fiji?
Well, I think it's very sad, yes. Very sad.
Mr. Hawke thinks you've got a further statement to make on the
I know, we've all been hearing that.
Is it true?
Ah.
No comment.
As we know, the constitutional position is that she has no basic role in the governance of this country. It's a formal role. Whereas in the Commonwealth, where some issues have arisen, her actual intervention and attitude has been significant. Let me be precise about that. In 1987 at the Vancouver conference, there was a very critically important issue about the position of Fiji. And I had a talk to her about it because we in Australia had a rather particular knowledge and understanding of the circumstances. And she was remarkable in her, quick perception of the issues. And I don't say that in a condescending way because they're complex and it's just one part of a vast Commonwealth. But she intervened there in a way, made her position clear, and it had a significant impact upon the way the Commonwealth made their decision about that very delicate subject.
Like all the best families, we have our share of eccentricities, of impetuous and wayward youngsters, and of family disagreements. But we also have our wise uncles and aunts, and the solid, dependable family members on whom everyone relies.
She has a role as head of the Commonwealth. She doesn't have a particular role in Europe. She's the Queen of Great Britain. She's one of several heads of state. But in Europe, in the Commonwealth, she is the head of the Commonwealth. She's also Queen of several Commonwealth countries. But being head of the Commonwealth gives her a role. And it's not just a formal role either. It's something that she and Prince Philip feel very strongly about and give a lot of time to. And I think it's abundantly worthwhile, particularly if, as I believe, the Commonwealth is coming out of the shadows of the 70s and 80s and re-establishing itself with an actual role in the world. That makes the Queen's position, I think, more rewarding and more real for herself and for everybody.
There is so much about the monarchy that is intangible. It is, like any sovereignty, it is psychological. So it's extremely difficult to describe. Here are the 6 accomplishments of the monarchy. I think the most important is the manner in which this huge transition has taken place. Perhaps second to that, the ability to develop the Commonwealth along lines that are different from those that existed before, and which share the kinds of principles that, on the whole, people identify as British, a sort of parliamentary, constitutional government, democratic, embodying a spirit.
I am the descendant of one party to the Treaty of Waitangi, and many who are here today are descendants of the original Maori signatories, your Te Puna. The disappointment felt by succeeding generations has led to an intense scrutiny of the treaty and to the recognition of some of the causes of that disappointment. Today, we are strong enough and honest enough to learn the lessons of the last 150 years and to admit that the treaty has been imperfectly observed.
I suppose the most memorable year was 1977, which was the year of the Silver Jubilee. The Queen, and indeed the government of the day, took a bit of persuading that the country, and indeed the Commonwealth, was ready for a year of celebrations. It was a rather cautious start, but as the Queen went to all the Commonwealth monarchies and to every part of the United Kingdom, and as the thousands and thousands of people turned out, and as the children rushed up and gave her Mars bars and flowers, and the whole thing went on and on and on. The Queen, you could see her enjoying it in the best sense of the word, but also of constantly being surprised at the affection and indeed the love that there was for her.
I don't think she was expecting that. Suddenly, everybody rallies round and discovers what a wonderful thing they have that they've been taking for granted and carping at. And suddenly they realise, no, but this really, really means a lot and has a great significance for us all.
The last time there had been a Silver Jubilee was during the reign of King George V, and on that occasion the Empire, as it then was, came to London. In 1977, the Queen went to the Commonwealth, as it had now become, and that included going to Northern Ireland. It was a decision which was taken on advice, obviously. It was a risk, but the visit went off, and well, the Queen was already held in high esteem, but I mean, if it was possible, her stock rose even more because of readiness to go to Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles.
Everybody, suddenly, all their nicest qualities came out. And it was a real party spirit, but with the Queen as the centre and the head, and the whole reason for it to happen.
It was a question of what gift was going to be provided to her from Australia. And I said, look, don't give her another dinner set or something. The vaults of Windsor Castle must be full of unused dinner sets. I said, give her something that she'll remember Australia by. I suggested a horse. And they thought that was a great idea. And she was sounded out, and she obviously thought it was a great idea. So we had one bred to Northern Hemisphere time, and I organised it through one of Australia's leading trainers and breeders. It was a magnificent-looking animal, but unfortunately, as is sometimes the case in this noble sport of kings and queens, its performance didn't match its looks. And of all the horses that she's had, I think this was preeminently amongst the least successful. But she took a thoroughly decent and jovial attitude towards that.
Flat racing is known as a sport of kings. Well, of course, as a sport of kings and queens with her. It is inestimable. Any other activity, any other sport would do anything to get as a patron, which virtually Her Majesty the Queen is. It's her hobby, and the extraordinary thing is how knowledgeable she has become with all the duties she's got, all the state papers, all the engagements that she has to fulfill. She doesn't let the racing go by. The Queen goes to extraordinary lengths when naming her horses, looking at the sire and dam and the names of them. One I particularly liked was Enharmonic, one of her favourites, and the dam of Enharmonic was called Contralto, and actually gave one of the great joys of Her Majesty in 1993, Enharmonic in a thrilling finish to the Diomed Stakes at Epsom on Derby Day. Got up and won by head, and the sheer joy and the excitement and the thrill that Her Majesty got from Enharmonic's win just proves her love of the turf. Well, after the war, of course, she really got involved, especially in the breeding. She loves that side of racing. She knows the bloodlines going so far back. I don't think anyone in the country, and this is not flattering Her Majesty, I don't think anyone in the country knows more about the intricacies of the thoroughbred and the bloodlines than she does. Majesty's had tremendous success in the racing field, won 4 of the 5 classics. And she remember horses like Pall Mall, Carrozza, Highclere, Dunfermline, horses like that she will never forget. But everybody throughout the nation, throughout the racing world, and of course Her Majesty would love her to win the Derby. The one great race that has eluded her so far. And going back to the beginning of her reign in 1953, Oriel now comes up. Could it be this year, next year, maybe before the end of the century? Her Majesty would win the Derby itself at Epsom. That would be the finest present of all.
In the second half of the 20th century, a shy young princess of 25 has blossomed into a confident woman who is a master of ceremony, but who also possesses an intricate knowledge of the rituals of statecraft. Much of her work is performed under the intense glare of public scrutiny, and through the years people have come to know her better and better.
Queen Elizabeth I, when she was aged 69, and in the 44th year of her reign, received the faithful Commons, and she made a remarkable speech. It was the second famous speech of Queen Elizabeth I. And in it she said this sentence: "Though God has raised me high, I count it the glory of my crown that I have reigned with your loves." That's the same as Queen Elizabeth II.
I have found her to be very well informed about world events, and also considerate and compassionate. And I think Her Majesty has a wonderful way with words of putting things across in a manner that is dignified and understated.
The greatest problem in the world today remains the gap between rich and poor countries. And we shall not begin to close this gap until we hear less about nationalism and more about interdependence. We in the Commonwealth are fortunate enough to belong to a worldwide comradeship. Let us make the most of it. Let us all resolve to communicate as friends in tolerance and understanding.
She's always remained rather cool, rather remote, but through this slightly forbidding outside, there is a gleam of humour and wit that is irrepressible.
My fondest recollection of it, no, it's only a series of, it's the years. I don't remember any one particular episode. There have been no dramas or anything at all. It's been a very smooth, because she is so professional in her attitude to things, and would be the opposite of making any kind of scene. And I say the highest is the raising of the eyebrows, and you say, "Yes, ma'am, we know it's not very good." I mean, up go the eyebrows, and then not a word is said. And of course, it is this immensely well-brought-up girl, a well-behaved girl, if it's a thing you can say about your queen. But when you have quite a lot of temperamental ladies over the years who've favoured my establishment, to have somebody so calm and got everything in perspective.
I wish everyone could see her up close and personal as Barbara and I have seen her. The respect that almost everyone feels for her would be even higher. And if anyone doubted that, I would love to have had them see and been on the field when the Queen went with me to this baseball game in Baltimore. It was a working man's crowd, blue-collar workers, if you want to call them that. The place went absolutely wild in showing their support and their friendship for Queen Elizabeth. It was a wonderful thing. You just could feel the affection that the American people have for her.
It's probably true over the years that Americans have had a certain awareness that our own origins came from breaking with the British monarchy. And there is, therefore, a kind of curiosity, a kind of push-me, pull-you between Americans and this monarchy. We don't understand it very well. We find it, I think, a little antediluvian. And yet there's a tremendous curiosity about it, too. On the Queen's state visit, I would look at the crowds, and they turned out in large numbers, larger than I would have guessed. And part of the way they looked at the Queen was the kind of curiosity of a celebrity who's come to town.
She looked right at me. She looked right at me, right straight at me, and I curtsied.
But there was another reaction too, which was one that was very respectful, recognizing that here was somebody who symbolized a great deal and did a very difficult job very well.
She's a senior citizen like we are, and I hope she's holding up well.
She just epitomizes so much in elegance. She's a grand lady.
I was learning the skills of the Highland Games. Coming from Olympic Games and just putting the shot is one thing, but actually learning how to throw the hammer, the 56, the 28, and in fact toss the Braemar caber. It's the biggest caber in the world at 21 feet 10. And you go to Braemar, that is the games, if you like, and you get, in the olden days, you used to get 90,000 people there, you know, and it's just like the pin drops when the Queen arrives in her entourage of coaches, and like everybody stands up, everything stops, and it's an aura, you know. It is a fantastic feeling to be not only present, you know, at the same time, but she's come to watch, you know, you, a person or an individual, or the games in general, and it's always nice to be part of it. This particular day I put too much resin on my hands, which you have to put on your hands so the wood itself doesn't slip. And I actually won the Queen's trophy at that particular time for the overall champion. And it was going to be presented immediately by the Queen. And I said, look, I've got to wash the resin off my hands because it's too sticky. Now, they said, now. So I said, right, fair enough. So I went up and was receiving the trophy, and Her Majesty stuck her hands out, and I got her hands, and she actually stuck to my hand, and I was like so embarrassed, you know, and I like put the trophy and pull her hands off, you know, and that actually kind of sent everybody up in uproar with laughter, and somebody took that particular photograph, which I've got a copy of, you know, and it won Photograph of the Year, you know, and I think it was tremendous because it encapsulated everything about the royals at that particular time, carefree, on holiday, watching the games, and nothing matters, and it was that instant laughter.
I played in an FA Cup final in 1963 at Wembley. And I think it was one of the last cup finals that the Queen actually went to.
And behind, I think, Bobby Charlton.
Well, I went up and I didn't really want to give her a big sweaty hand to shake, you know, so I was making sure that my hand wasn't sweaty, and I said to her, which we had been told to actually not be afraid to say something, you know, don't be afraid to converse with the Queen if there's something, if she says something to you, don't be afraid to answer back. And I thought about this when I went up, and everyone else seemed to be just taking the medal and then going straight ahead, and I said to her, I said, I hope you enjoy the game, ma'am, you know. And she said, but you aren't half sweating, which I thought was really strange, you know. I thought she would say perspiring, not sweating.
For someone who spends so much time in the public eye, perhaps it is surprising that the Queen takes a low-key, practical approach to her image.
She never discusses image. I know that she has told me, oh, I can't have that, it's too chic. And I totally understand that. And with her wonderful complexion, she can wear practically any colour. But we don't want dark colours because they photograph black. The Queen is short. So you don't want anything you want to have anything with long lines if you can possibly do it. Unfortunately, fashion today is towards long lines. What I admire most about the Queen is that she has a typical upper class attitude to clothes, that they are not all important. She pays great attention to them, but they are not to knock you sideways. She wishes to make a friendly impression, and that she's taken great care to dress to please the audience, but never to make them feel uncomfortable or stunned.
One is not always aware of what she says because her presence is so incredible that you find you're answering automatically. And sometimes with that jewelry, I mean, what woman can answer anyway or remember anything? I just remember looking at her emeralds once, and I did not hear a word she said until she'd gone. I hope she doesn't think I'm terribly rude for staring, you know, like coveting her emeralds.
Well, she once said to me, "Don't put me in beige or nobody will know who I am." It's a good joke. It was done with a smile.
I think that her presence gives a sense of comfort and security to many people in Britain. When I meet my friends, I think that this is the one stable factor in a life that is otherwise always changing.
I think if you look back on the life and reign of the Queen so far, you have to look back also at what has happened in the United Kingdom since 1952. There has been the most enormous changes at every level, socially, politically, in terms of education, arts, entertainment. I mean, life is completely different in so many, many ways. And yet, throughout it all, the monarchy has remained the pivot around which everything else revolves.
I suppose the advances of science have probably made more changes to our lives than most of us realise. And because, therefore, the Queen is televised on every occasion, and the cameras are constantly on her, it's much more difficult, I think, to carry out the duties, but also there's a much greater interest. The more people know, the more they want to know.
It's one of the most striking characteristics, I think, of Britain in the post-war period, that this tremendous adjustment to a post-imperial age has been carried off, by and large, with remarkable grace. And I think you have to put some of the credit for that to the Queen.
Throughout decades of change, the monarchy has maintained very close ties with the armed forces.
We went through the Falklands together, and the Queen and the Duke of York were so anxious that the Duke of York should go there and fight for his country, for the freedom of the Falklands, as many other sons of mothers. And she had all, therefore, the same anxieties as every mother.
But perhaps the most trying year of her reign has been 1992.
"1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis."
The atmosphere was one of total support for the Queen in a way which was unusual. She'd opened her heart to those present and to the nation watching. And I think there was an emotional response to what the Queen said, as well as the loyal response which would always arise when the Queen is in the city.
No institution, city, monarchy, whatever, should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty and support, not to mention those who don't. But we are all part of the same fabric of our national society. And that scrutiny by one part of another can be just as effective if it is made with a touch of gentleness, good humour, and understanding.
Obviously, it's extremely sad that so much has happened over the last 2 or 3 years, which has allowed the media, given the media, offered the media the opportunity to appear to be intrusive and to make things uncomfortable for the royal family. But one has to admit that the press has not invented the events that have been happening and which, of course, have made the headlines.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
Four years later, the Prince and Princess of Wales agreed to divorce. That was not the end of this horrible year. In November, Windsor Castle went up in flames. The Queen's son, Prince Andrew, was there when it happened.
It took hold so quickly. I happened to be around the castle when it started, and I heard the fire alarm, and some 2 or 3 minutes later, when I came out of the room that I was actually in, you could see the smoke, not as extensive as it is now, but you could definitely see it. At the moment, there is no indication as to how it started. It started, as far as where it started in the private chapel.
I think the Windsor fire must have been about the most devastating thing that could happen to anybody. I mean, whether you've had a good year or a bad year, or, things haven't gone quite right. There is your home, because after all, it is our home as well. And watching it go up in a blaze, being helpless must have been the most horrible experience for anybody.
The fire brigade were not certain that they could hold it at that stage. And so as a precaution, the library was moved at a very early stage, because that is by far and above everything else the most valuable. And then everything was moved as a precaution. A great deal of effort and a great deal of time has been spent in actually improving the fire precautions throughout occupied royal palaces. And there is a programme underway in other palaces to improve the fire precautions. Quite apart from anything else, I think it's a responsibility that we have to make sure that it is adequately protected. It is fortunate that actually on the day that we had the fire precautions, the smoke alarms, the smoke detectors, the system actually operating. And with it being in operation, they were able to pinpoint and know exactly where to go and how to fight the fire.
Over the last few years, she's had a lot of annus horribilis problems, and I think people tend to forget all the good that has happened within the royal family, especially Her Majesty the Queen, where she goes all around the world and she's accepted as the head of state, accepted as the head of England, accepted as the head of the Commonwealth. And I think people tend to forget that she is a mother. And she has the same family problems. And I think, personally, she feels them.
Three years later, the country once again rallied round the royal family as they gathered on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The whole country joined them to commemorate the 50th anniversary of victory in Europe in World War II.
Land hope and glory, join in again. Mother of the free.
She was absolutely astounded at the crowd, the amount of people that came. And it thrilled her so much. You know, she wasn't putting on an act. She was genuinely surprised and very, very happy. And I thought, well, that's nice, because I think she was probably a little worried that maybe the crowd wouldn't be quite what it was. And it just showed the affection that everybody had for them.
I took my daughter because I wanted her to feel part of a nation. And this was the moment for her. And indeed it was for me, because there we were, crowds and crowds of us, listening to Dame Vera singing. And Rachel and I were right next door to a group of Cockneys who'd been here during the war and had been there first time on the first VE day. And they were singing their hearts out. And it was a very important moment in our nation's history that was recreated, because again, the bond of monarchy was restated.
Dame Vera and Cliff and myself were doing that singing bit outside. I had the medals on. He had to wear medals, and I've got quite a few because I happened to lead a few retreats in my time. And afterwards, we went round to see the Queen as they came off the balcony. The Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. And my medals by this time had slipped, and I hadn't noticed it. So when she came up to me, she said, "Oh, we can't have that," she said, and she put them back on again, which was very nice, I thought. And that was a great day, you know. That was a wonderful day. And I remember the Queen and the Queen Mother saying, "I don't think we'll ever see the like again." They were so excited by it all.
She was in such high spirits, and she really was on a high, if you like, because she was absolutely astounded at the crowd.
All you could see was a sea of faces. And I think that moment when he turned back and then the planes came over and all the rest of it, everything sort of culminated in this tremendous finale. And there they were, three people that you've known and respected all your life. And you couldn't resist the tear. Don't care who you are. Something happens. There's something about her that isn't there with anybody else. It's an aura. Probably it's what tradition and what we've become accustomed to, you know, knowing royalty throughout the centuries. And I think she carries with her that tradition. At the same time, she's her own woman.
She's been there so long. She's become part of, I hate to say the woodwork, but she is Great Britain. She is United Kingdom. And I think the achievement is to maintain dignity, to still have this aura I talk about, and everybody respects her qualities, I think. She never seems to lose her cool.
I think you have to say that the Queen oversaw what has probably been Britain's greatest transition in its modern history, from a great imperial power to a nation-state which had to redefine its interests all over the world. And the steadiness, the longevity, the symbolism, the durability, the persistence, the dutifulness, all of these things which the Queen seemed to embody I think, got Britain through a difficult period with tremendous grace.